What's going on, guys? Josh here with Shua Photography, and in today's video we are going to be discussing the Tamron 35mm to 150mm f2-2.8 that I adapted via the Megadap ETZ21 adapter so that I could put this Tamron lens on my Nikon Z7II, Z6II, and Z5. Now, it took me a little while to do this video, and the reason I wanted to wait to complete this video is because when I started doing my tests, I realized that there was an issue. At the very beginning, it was frequent. So basically what happened was that the Tamron lens adapted with the Megadap adapter to the Z7II, and like I said, it happened frequently when I first started testing this lens. What would happen is that I would be photographing and then all of a sudden I would lose autofocus, and then the only way for me to take a photo would be to manually focus. Turn the camera off, turn it back on, and everything is right with the world. You can still take photos with it. The only thing is that autofocus is not active. And I looked at my settings, made sure that I didn't bump anything in, like on the screen, to change any settings or anything like that. I made sure that I didn't hit the AF to manual focus switch. I didn't hit any of that. So what I chalked it down to was that it lost communication. The lens lost communication with the camera, so it couldn't autofocus. So what I wanted to do was make sure that everything was good and updated everything. So what I did was I updated the firmware on the lens, the firmware on the adapter, and I already had the updated firmware on the Z7II, which was brought out in November of 2022. There's an air show going on, so if you can hear that, that's what that is. If you can't hear it, then great. So I made sure that I had the most up-to-date firmware on the camera, the lens, and the adapter. Megadap sends you a little clip thing that you can put on the adapter and actually update the firmware. So I updated the firmware on that. I updated the firmware on the lens. The great thing about this lens is that it has a USB-C connector on the lens itself, so you don't need an additional adapter. On my older Tamron Nikon F-mount lenses that I've been using, you actually had to put and screw on a connector that you would plug in via USB, but now USB-C port right here on the lens so that you can update the firmware. Now that issue only happens maybe once. I mean, it's really hard to tell. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It does happen. The only way for me to clear that is to turn the camera off and turn it back on. Since getting this lens, I have photographed multiple portrait sessions, 4 weddings. I'm doing my 5th wedding tomorrow. Using this lens on this camera has been fantastic. I'm okay with the now occasional or very rare instance of it losing autofocus because of how good this lens is. This lens is phenomenal. The range of this lens and the image quality of this lens is just superb. And we're gonna go through some of the images that I was able to capture with this lens. I took it to WPPI with me last week, and I absolutely love this lens. The fact that you can go from 35mm to 150mm and have f2 at the wide end and f2.8 at the long end, like, this range is just absolutely insane. To give you a little bit of context, when I photographed 3 weddings with solely this lens and my 20mm f1.8 Z lens on my Z6II. So I usually photograph a wedding, dual slung camera bodies. I have the Z6II on my left hip, the Z7II on my right hip. And for those weddings, I photographed with just this lens and the 20mm f1.8. I used to have the 24-70 on the Z6II and then the 70-200 on the Z7II for a wedding day, but I never really needed to use the 24-70 all that often during a ceremony. I would use it a lot for the getting ready shots and during the reception, but like, this lens ticks damn near all of the boxes. If this was at like a 28 to 150, f2 to 2.8, I would only need this lens. But I do like to go wider than 35 millimeters at times, so that's why I have the 20 millimeter f1.8. I cannot wait, now that Tamron is now making Z mount lenses, I can't wait for this to come native on the Z mount. As soon as it does, I'm going to buy it. There's no way around it. Right now, obviously it's a little more expensive of a lens because you have to buy a $250 Megadap adapter and the lens, but for me, so worth it. So you've probably seen all the reviews on this for Sony. If you want the specs of this lens, I'll throw it up right here. I just wanted to talk about my experience with it. Autofocus is quick and accurate. There's really nothing about this lens other than the fact that I have to adapt it, and it does have that now rare communication issue. But I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic. Now, let's go ahead and hop into the computer and we will show you some of the images that I captured with this lens and camera combination. Hey, welcome to the Shua Photography Editing Dungeon. I've got almost 1,200 images that I have taken with this lens, and I know you guys don't want to hang out listening to me talk about 1,200 images individually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to handpick some of the images to show off the focal range, show off some of the flaring that other reviewers have pointed out about this lens, and see if it's something that you guys would like, and just show you some of the awesome images that you can capture with this lens. All right, so we are now in Capture One Pro, and this was the very first image that I took with this lens. So I borrowed this lens from one of my photographer friends here in Tucson, Justin Haugen, who just so happens to be a Tamron ambassador. I borrowed his copy of this lens when he didn't need it. I only had a couple of days with it, and since then, after I returned it, I went ahead and purchased the lens myself. This was the very first one. I was waiting for my male model to get to the location, and I know that there was some flaring issues that some photographers or some reviewers had mentioned, and so I wanted to kind of test that. So shooting directly into the sun, I noticed very little flaring other than the brightness of the sun. But then if we go to the very next image here and we turn to the side, you'll notice the flaring right over here. So this image here, you can see the ghosting here where that flare is coming through. So it is prominent, but I'll show you in another example during a wedding where there is some of that flaring, and it wasn't a huge deal. It actually looked halfway decent. I wanted to pull these two images up side by side here, and this was because the first shoot I did was I was actually using as promo material for an energy drink company that I am friends with the owners of. So I was doing some of these while I was waiting for my male model, who happens to be a firefighter. Each of those I tried to frame very similarly, but one on the left is at 150 millimeters and the one on the right is at 35 millimeters. So you can kind of see the difference in the look based on where you're at, but then we'll go into some other like actual focal range here in a little bit. During this shoot was when I really noticed that the autofocus was just shutting off quite often. So I was trying to have to figure that out while also photographing and all of that good stuff. The next session I did was right after that, where I had a model in downtown Tucson with me, and we were just going around finding different looks and stuff like that. Got some really cool images. This lens, like I said, the range is really, really good. I really liked it. So at 35 millimeters, obviously you've got the wide, and then you can go right into 150 millimeters and just absolutely obliterate the background. Then we went into a restaurant. They had some really cool red lights, so used some off-camera flash and did some really unique photos. I'll show you some of the photos from WPPI where I used this lens a lot. Primarily, actually, I did use an old, really old manual focus Nikon lens, the 105 f2.5. lens. I used that manually focusing the entire time for one of the sessions that I did, and was just having fun with it. But yeah, we had a car meet hosted by a photographer named Sean Lara, and we got all of these really cool images. A bunch of dudes from the car scene in Las Vegas came out with their cars, and they came out looking really cool. Then during WPPI, I took some posing classes and wanted to just kind of add some new poses to my repertoire, and so I used this lens to capture these images. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of these images. I just want to show you, what this lens can do, and then show you some images from real world weddings before we hop over there. So I love this image. This was at 150 millimeters at f4 in one of the expo booths with the lighting setups, and I just really loved her eyes. She was super awesome. I actually got to work with her a lot this year at WPPI. Had a lot of fun. So let me go and show you some real world examples of why I really love this lens. Okay, so I'm gonna put these two photos up here side by side. Obviously they're not perfect by any means, but what I really wanted to show you with these two images was the focal range that you get between 35 and 150 millimeters. So the image on the left, as the bride and her dad are walking down the aisle, is at 35 millimeters, and then when the dad and bride got down there, dad was hugging her, that's at 150 millimeters. So you can see the incredible range that you can get with this lens, and this was the biggest seller for me on this lens, is just the sheer range. That's 35 and 150 millimeters. Show you some of the group shots at 35 millimeters. In this wedding, so this is where I'm going to show you flaring. So this is directly at the sun. So what I did notice is that if you're pointing directly at the sun, obviously it's going to be bright, you're going to have a hot spot, but you're not going to get any of the flaring as you would with going off to the side. So if you go off axis of the sun, you'll definitely see the flaring here. So very similar to the first image I showed you was the flaring, obviously it was off to the other side. But this is what you can expect to see at f2.8, 150 millimeters with the flaring. So if that's something you don't like, then this lens is not going to be for you. On the last wedding that I did, that I second shot for my buddy Justin, these were some of the images that I got with this lens. This is at 55 millimeters at f2.2, obviously with off-camera flash. Really awesome portrait that I got. This is at 35 millimeters indoor at f2. As the bride was getting ready, one of her bridesmaids had just finished putting on her shoes and she was going to help her up. So just showing kind of the versatility of this lens. Here's one of my favorite images is this one, but in black and white. The black and white image of this is just incredible. It stopped me in my tracks and I was like, yes, this is what this is what we're going to be using. Here is at 86 millimeters. And then here is at 150 millimeters. So you can see really awesome image quality. We've got 35 millimeter to 110 millimeters. So this is obviously with the range, you don't have to stick at 150 millimeter or 35 millimeter. You can frame it however you want within that range. And I really do enjoy having that range. The 35 millimeters, sign-in book and all of that stuff. You can see the image on the left is at 35 straight overhead, and the one on the right is at 92 millimeters. So you can get a lot of different looks with this lens, which is one of my favorite things. So here's an image of one of the groomsmen. This was in direct sunlight out by the pool during cocktail hour. Grabbed this shot of him. So in natural light. Another one of the bride and groom at 35 millimeters. Another one here. So this one I had to do a lot of work to in order to get it this way. So if you want to know kind of what the range of the Z7II is, you can do whatever you need to do to make your image what it needs to be. Like I said, I don't want to go through all of these 1200 plus images, so I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what this lens can do, kind of the range that you can get with this, that you can get some awesome images with it. Obviously you can get awesome images with any lens, but I wanted to show you what I thought and my experiences with this lens were. If you guys have any questions in regards to the lens and how it performs, or the E to Z adapter or anything like that, feel free to leave a comment down below and I will answer it either in the comments, or if I feel that it deserves its own video, I will do that as well. So leave a comment down below. Let me know your guys' thoughts. Is this a lens that you guys want to get? Do you want to get the adapter, or are you going to hold off and wait until maybe Tamron makes one for the Z mount? I know for a fact once they do make it for the native Z mount, I will be buying it. But because we don't know how long that's going to take, because Tamron just started producing Z mount lenses, but I'm going to use the crap out of this lens between now and then. Subscribe to my channel if you guys are interested in anything photography related. I'm not on here all the time. I don't do this for a living. I just do it for other people who might be interested in some of the same stuff that I am. So again, I appreciate you guys for being here and following along till the end of this video, and we'll see you in the next one. Josh with Shua Photography.